This has been a long time coming. Developed by Westwood Studios, the same Westwood that cursed us with Hillsfar and later blessed us with Lands of Lore, the Throne of Chaos, both of which I've already made videos about, Eye of the Beholder hit store shelves in 1991, and as if I have to say it, you already know it was published by the one, the only Strategic Simulations. It's the first in a trilogy, being followed by The Legend of Darkmoon and The Assault on Myth Draenor. In the way that Shadow Sorcerer, the subject of a previous episode, tried and failed to be the next step towards glory for D&D games, Eye of the Beholder flatly was. As I touched on in the Shadow Sorcerer video, by the time the 90s had rolled through, though the gold box games were still kicking around, they had begun to wear out their welcome, primarily on account of the fact that Strategic Simulations found a way to publish over a dozen mainline and spin-off entries into the series over the course of about 5 years. Consumers were yearning for something new, and Eye of the Beholder scratched that itch. From top to bottom, it was a production the likes of which the license hadn't seen to that point, and such a grandiose offering on Westwood's part really couldn't have come at a better time, or, frankly, be delivered by a more appropriate company. Throughout their existence, Westwood developed something of a knack for always sitting on the cutting edge of game design and development, and a real propensity for releasing exceptionally well received, both at the time and in retrospect, games in a wide assortment of genres. Whether it was the Legend of Kyrandia adventure games, the real-time strategy masterpieces of the Command & Conquer series, or again, the RPG majesty of the first Lands of Lore entry, Westwood seemingly could make just about anything work. All of these games, in many cases, were just bigger and better than their contemporaries in regard to what they offered to the player and how they made use of the hardware available at the time. I mean, this stuff was high-tech, if this picture from their office is any indication. What? You don't think this looks like the place where people would be cranking out some majestical bangers? As such, it's of precisely zero surprise that Eye of the Beholder featured new, spiffy 256-color VGA graphics, full-blown cutscenes, greatly expanded sound support and design, as well as new user-friendly systems such as the fact that the entire game, for the most part, plays within one window. I know that's a weird thing to praise in 2024, but not having to swap between 50 different screens to see your inventory, spellbook, or stats was a pretty big deal back in the day. For comparison of everything I just described, Eye of the Beholder and Secret of the Silverblades, the third of the gold box titles released just a year earlier. To say Beholder made Blades look like a relic from another time would be an understatement, to put it nicely. Which is ironic because, in today's world, it's Eye of the Beholder that's far closer to a relic. Fun fact, the reason that it's taken me something of an eternity to finally make a video about this game is because I used to hate it. Now, part of the reason I used to regard this title, and all of the Beholder titles, with such venom, is because I've got the IQ of a fly. But an equally big reason is because, in its original state, this game feels old and sure as hell plays old. Many of the wonderful quality of life features that I lauded Lands of Lore for are nowhere to be found in Westwood's earlier offering here. You're rocking with one save slot, some pretty hefty restrictions in terms of what items can be used depending on where characters are in the party formation, and of course no minimap of any kind. Tried as I might through multiple attempts and playthroughs, I could not bring myself to enjoy this game enough to progress very far, let alone complete it. I know, feel free to tell me I'm not made of sturdy enough stuff for these classic games, but as I'm sure I've said before, I just don't find these types of realities very fun to play with in 2024, even within the context of when these games were made. It was even weirder because through the osmosis of watching others play it and how much I love the Throne of Chaos, it felt like a game I should have been able to get myself to like, some of those issues notwithstanding. I know that you could argue that charting maps is not actually all that difficult, and I would agree, but I would also counter with the point that it's an entirely unfun and time-consuming process. That fact is made even worse when one considers that these sorts of decisions, like leaving you with nothing but a compass to navigate through a maze of puzzles and traps, some that intersect with each other across multiple floors, weren't actually made because the developers thought they were good for the game or the player. They were made because the publishers really wanted to sell you supplemental clue books and have you call into help hotlines so that they could squeeze a few extra dollars out of their players in return for said players actually having a chance of beating the game. But when the trilogy was put on Steam, a program by the name of the All-Seeing Eye came to my attention. This nifty little edition, which comes prepackaged with said Steam versions and can be easily installed for the GOG releases, serves as part editor and, far more importantly for me at least, an automapper. That's right. All-Seeing Eye so graciously provides the security blanket of a map that I so keenly crave, one that you can write notes on and whatnot to boot, as well as some other helpful features such as the ability to back up your save and even change the game rules if you so desire, unlocking previously hidden items and abilities in the process. I stayed away from those changes for the sake of maintaining the spirit of the game as best I could, but it was All-Seeing Eye that actually gave me some interest in trying to get through Eye of the Beholder in earnest. And my goodness, if I'm not ready to thank God that it did, because this game is awesome. Not as awesome as Lands of Lore. Westwood had clearly learned a thing or two developing their duo of Beholder games that let them polish the Throne of Chaos to an absurd degree, but Eye of the Beholder is a fantastic game on its own merit, and perhaps more importantly, as I alluded to earlier, wound up being a really important release for the development of D&D video gaming. More than anything, what put Eye of the Beholder so head and shoulders above many of the previous D&D games, specifically the gold box offerings, was its presentation. Gone were the low color graphics, grainy cut-in images, and long text descriptions of areas of the past, and in were the sprawling labyrinths underneath Waterdeep and the portraits of your party. This game's beauty was crafted in deluxe paint, and does a heck of a lot more than just look nice. Having the ability to explore such an intricately detailed environment, watching as it and the enemies within it change as you progress further, in real time as opposed to through insular screens and repetitive staging areas for combat, again a la the gold box games, provides a much greater sense of immersion. The scant few characters you come across in the puzzles you interact with are granted the opportunity to be that much more memorable and impart a greater impact on the player. There is something far more tangible about everything you do in this game. It feels like you're trudging through these sewers. It helps to cultivate a real connection between you, the player, and everything going on. The same could be said for the party you gather. Being able to put portraits to each member, for as simplistic as it might seem, does wonders to color how you see your own characters. Before this, you either had a preset group, or names, a sprite, and whatever you could muster in your head. Here, you can actually see what you had in mind come to fruition. I know this probably seems like a weird thing to make a big deal about, but I do think it is imperative to continue that immersion. Imagine if you couldn't select a picture for the ball spawn in Baldur's Gate. You would probably still have an idea of how you pictured them in your head, sure, but it wouldn't be anywhere near the same thing as being able to put a face to them. Additionally, though, I typically find the ability to just dictate stats however you like to be a bit silly. In this case, I think it can help to let you realize your characters as best you see fit as it pertains to your own intentions and the adventure at hand. And I'm not making these sorts of comparisons just to deride the gold box games. I think the presentation found there has its own charm and merit. What I'm saying, especially at the time it was released, is that Eye of the Beholder was the first time that a D&D RPG was presented in a fashion that we've come to expect from more modern titles. And if the fact that this type of presentation later became mainstay within D&D games, with games in the Dark Sun and Ravenloft series, both making use of more advanced presentations for the purposes of delivering a more immersive experience, then I would say that Eye of the Beholder certainly did something right in that respect. This presentation is so strong, both for how well it was detailed, particularly for the early 90s, and how it delivers its gameplay in more expressive formats, that it even supports the narrative to a real degree. You create a party of 4 adventurers who are then tasked by the Lords of Waterdeep to wade knee-deep into the dank sewers beneath the city in order to uncover who's responsible for a conspiracy plot that has begun to loom over the city. No sooner than you're knee-deep in what is likely garbage and filled water does the group you're searching for, no doubt considering themselves a right bunch of jokers, collapse the stairway from which you entered, leaving you with no way out other than through. Henceforth, as the goodly band of adventurers that you are, there's nothing else to do but press forward and see the task through, vanquishing a rash of skeletons, kobolds, and demons within the hidden dungeon underneath the city along the way. That's it. There's no real deeper meaning or plot twist that keep things interesting, just a singular goal and a lot of enemies between you and it. And yet, because of the pomp and circumstance injected into it by the cutscenes and the wonderful graphics, the simple story comes to bear a lot more weight than it probably has any right to. You want to keep progressing to find out what is plaguing Waterdeep, even if the stated reasons for doing so are so sparse. It would have helped if the game had an actual ending, something that was heavily criticized even back around the original release, but they added one for the Amiga port, so I guess it all checks out. Seriously, this game just doesn't have an ending. You kill the final boss, and which I bet you can't imagine what the final boss is, and the game just ends. I don't know. And, of course, the gameplay. The sweet, sweet first-person dungeon crawling of yesteryear. Granted, from a basic standpoint, it's about everything you would expect. You crawl through the levels, either swing your sword or cast some spells at whatever stands in your way, and do your best not to fall into a pit in every other quadrant. The puzzles are engaging without being too overtly backbreaking, though they can mess with your brain on occasion if you don't keep track of what you're doing or where you are, but overall, Eye of the Beholder is exactly what you want from this sort of game. The enemies are varied, there is a good amount of loot to be found, and it never gets too bogged down with senseless backtracking or other wastes of time. If you want a more in-depth breakdown of this type of gameplay format itself, go check out my video about Dungeon Hack from a while back. A lot of those same topics and systems are found here. One place where the gameplay really shines is in the surprising depth presence, an aspect that it absolutely holds above Lands of Lore. Use of the 2nd edition rule set means you've got plenty of choice as to how you construct your party, which spells you choose to prepare, and as such, how you might tackle any given situation. Multi-classes, particularly those combined with clerics, do a lot of heavy lifting mainly because you start as a smaller party and remain as one for a good deal of time, but the choice is left up to you and will unquestionably dictate how you get through combat and which recruitable party members you choose to take along with you. Granted, it's not a complete conversion, there are plenty of spells left unrepresented, and I could have easily done without the hunger mechanics, seeing as it's made completely pointless by the fact that clerics can just cast Create Food and Water, but it does do a lot to provide breadth to the experience, which really helps it stay fresh as you make your way through its 8 or so hour runtime. It's exciting to unlock new spells and abilities with which to better make your way through the dungeon, and watching the virtues of whatever party you cobble together mature, even for a low-level affair, is certainly fulfilling. All of these aspects came together to give the digital D&D license exactly the kick in the ass that it needed. We can be honest about it, though the Goldbox games have their own legacy and were important in their own right towards advancing D&D gaming, they had become bland and pretty darn repetitive in their later years. Eye of the Beholder, by contrast, was new and exciting and really serves to show how proper actualization of presentation can not only better immerse players within the role-playing experience, but simultaneously elevate the gameplay and story as well. This game, for the time, was like an immersion bomb, and I am all here for it. While a lot of what made it so new and relevant at the time might be old by today's standards, that doesn't mean it isn't a game worth playing, because all those components that made it great in 1991 are still here in 2024. I think it needs some help. I really wouldn't recommend playing this game without the all-seeing eye, but I was left flatly stunned by just how much the simple addition of a minimap took me from feeling largely apathetic towards this game to being a huge fan. Sincerely, I had a whale of a time finally playing through it proper and look forward to getting around to the sequels at some point in the future. The second game, at least. The third is... We won't talk about the third game, okay? Eye of the Beholder, though it was new at the time, is old now, but there is still a great D&D adventure to be found here. Just give it a little TLC to make it fit more what you might be looking for in a game today, and trust me, you won't be disappointed.